You know that feeling when you're lying in bed at 2 a.m., staring at your phone, watching your checking account balance like it's a ticking time bomb, and you're mentally calculating whether that $47 dinner with friends 3 days ago is going to be the reason your rent check bounces? Or when you get that notification that your car needs new tires and your stomach just drops because you absolutely know that you don't have the money sitting there ready to handle it. Or when someone invites you to a wedding and your first thought isn't, oh, how exciting, it's can I afford the gift, the outfit, and maybe a hotel room without completely destroying my finances for the next month? Sound familiar? Well, what if I told you there's a specific dollar amount that changes everything? A threshold where your brain literally stops operating in crisis mode and starts thinking like a wealthy person, even if you're nowhere close to actually being wealthy yet? My name is Matt, and I spend way too much time thinking about money psychology, behavioral finance, and why some people seem to effortlessly build wealth while others stay trapped in paycheck-to-paycheck anxiety despite making decent money. If you're someone who wants to understand the real mechanics of how financial stability actually works instead of just getting generic advice like save more or cut out lattes, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up helping you finally break free from that constant low-level money stress that's been running in the background of your life for way too long. Before we dive into why $10,000 is the most important financial milestone you'll ever hit, let me ask you something. What do you think separates someone who's financially stable from someone who's constantly stressed about money? Most people will say income. They'll say the stable person just makes more money, or they inherited something, or they got lucky with a high-paying job. And sure, income matters. But that's not actually what creates the psychological shift I'm talking about. The truth is financial stability doesn't work the way most people think it does. It's not a smooth, gradual climb where every extra $1,000 in your account feels equally valuable. Here's what actually happens. There are specific thresholds, invisible psychological barriers, where everything changes all at once. Below the threshold, you're pushing a boulder uphill. Every dollar saved feels like a struggle. Every unexpected expense feels like a crisis. You're operating in what I call financial survival mode, where your brain is constantly scanning for threats, constantly calculating worst-case scenarios, constantly in defense mode. But once you cross certain thresholds, something remarkable happens. That boulder you've been pushing suddenly crests the hill and starts rolling downhill on its own. The same effort that was getting you nowhere suddenly generates momentum. Your psychology shifts from defense to offense, from scarcity to abundance, from reactive to proactive. And $10,000 is the first major threshold where this shift happens. It's not just a nice round number. It's not arbitrary. $10,000 is the amount where your emergency fund becomes real, where your financial foundation becomes solid enough that your brain can finally stop operating in constant crisis mode and start thinking strategically about building wealth. But here's where it gets really interesting. The difference isn't just mathematical. The real magic happens in your brain. Once you hit this milestone, you don't just have more money sitting in an account. You've fundamentally rewired how you think about money, how you make decisions, and how you see yourself. And that psychological transformation is worth more than the $10,000 itself. Let me explain what's actually happening in your brain before you hit this milestone. When you have less than a few $1,000s saved, maybe nothing at all, your brain operates in survival mode. Neuroscientists call this scarcity mindset, and it's not just some abstract concept. It's a measurable cognitive state where your mental bandwidth is constantly consumed by financial threat assessment. You're not thinking about opportunities. You're thinking about disasters. What if my car breaks down? What if I lose my job? What if someone I love has an emergency and needs help? This isn't weakness. This is your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do, which is prioritize immediate threats over long-term planning. The problem is, when you're stuck in this mode, you make worse decisions. You avoid the dentist until it's an emergency, turning a $200 cleaning into a $2,000 root canal. You can't negotiate effectively at work because you're terrified of losing your income. You say yes to financial obligations you should decline because you can't think clearly about future consequences when present threats feel so overwhelming. But something remarkable happens when you cross that $10,000 threshold. Your brain gets breathing room. Not enough to stop working or caring, but enough to shift from reactive to proactive. Suddenly, small, unexpected expenses don't trigger that cortisol spike anymore. A $300 car repair is annoying, but it's not a crisis. Your mental energy, which was previously consumed by constant threat monitoring, becomes available for strategic thinking. You start seeing opportunities instead of just avoiding disasters. Research from the Financial Health Network shows that households with at least 3 months of expenses saved, which for most people is somewhere between $8,000 and $15,000, report 43% lower financial anxiety and are 67% more likely to describe themselves as financially healthy compared to those with less than 1 month saved. And here's what's fascinating about that data. The actual dollar amount varies by person, but the psychological impact is remarkably consistent once you cross that threshold. This isn't just about having a cushion. It's about identity transformation. You stop seeing yourself as someone who's barely surviving financially and start seeing yourself as someone who has their foundation solid. And that shift in self-perception changes everything about how you interact with money going forward. Here's where the math starts getting really exciting. Let's say you're making $55,000 a year, which is pretty close to the median income in the U.S. After taxes, you're taking home about $42,000, or roughly $3,500 a month. Your rent is $1,200. Groceries and basics are another $600. You've got a car payment, insurance, gas, utilities, and all the regular stuff. You're not living extravagantly, but you're also not eating ramen every night. You manage to save $500 a month. Not easy, but doable. At that rate, hitting your first $10,000 takes you 20 months. A year and 8 months. That's a year and a half of discipline, sacrifice, and delayed gratification. It's not easy, and frankly, most people give up somewhere along the way because 20 months feels like forever when you're grinding through it. But here's the part that will blow your mind. Let's say you don't stop at $10,000. You keep going with that same $500 monthly contribution. But now, you're investing it, earning a conservative 8% annual return. Your second $10,000, getting from $10,000 to $20,000, takes you only 17 months. 3 months faster than the first $10,000, even though you're contributing the exact same amount every month. Why? Because compound interest is starting to kick in. Your money is working alongside you now. Your third $10,000, from $20,000 to $30,000, that takes 15 months. Your fourth $10,000, just 13 months. By the time you hit $50,000, you can generate another $10,000 in about 10 months with the same $500 monthly contribution. The same amount that took you nearly 2 years initially is now happening in less than a year. And here's where it gets absolutely wild. Once you hit $100,000, which sounds massive and far away, but is more achievable than you think, you can generate $10,000 in investment growth alone in roughly 14 months without contributing another penny. The amount that took you 20 months of disciplined saving initially is now happening automatically, just from your existing wealth compounding. Let me put that in perspective. If you start at zero today and save $500 a month while earning 8% returns, you'll hit $10,000 in about 19 months. You'll hit $100,000 in about 11 years. And once you're at $100,000, you'll generate more in annual investment returns than you were originally saving each year. Your money is doing the heavy lifting. You've essentially automated wealth building. Now you might be thinking, okay, Matt, but wealthy people have access to better investments, better advice, better opportunities. Of course, their money grows faster. And while there is some truth to that at the ultra-high end, it's not what's driving this phenomenon. What's driving this is simple mathematics and time. The 8% return I'm using isn't some special hedge fund secret. It's basically the historical average return of a boring S&P 500 index fund that anyone can invest in with $100. The compound interest formula doesn't care about your net worth or your connections. It works the same whether you're starting with $1,000 or $100,000. The only question is whether you stick with it long enough to let the math do its thing. But here's the part that most people completely miss, and it might be the most important point in this entire video. By the time you hit that first $10,000, you haven't just saved money. You've proven something to yourself that's worth more than the money itself. You've proven that you can delay gratification. You've proven that you can stick to a plan for nearly 2 years, even when it's boring and hard. You've proven that you can resist lifestyle inflation. You've fundamentally rewired your brain and built the most important financial habit you'll ever develop, which is the discipline to consistently pay yourself first. Think about what happens psychologically once you've internalized that discipline. A $4 coffee doesn't stress you out anymore because you know you've got $10,000 sitting in your account and another $500 automatically going to savings this month. You're not pinching pennies out of fear. You're spending intentionally because you've built the foundation that allows you to enjoy life without anxiety. Your relationship with money transforms from adversarial to cooperative. Even better, you start noticing opportunities that were always there, but you couldn't take advantage of before. A friend mentions they're looking for someone to do freelance work. Before, you would have said no, because you needed the security of your regular paycheck and couldn't risk any disruption. Now, with $10,000 backing you up, you can say yes and potentially create a new income stream. You see a heavily discounted course or certification that could boost your career. Before, it felt like a risky expense. Now it feels like an investment because you have the financial cushion to take calculated risks. Your entire decision-making framework shifts from "can I afford this?" to "is this the best use of my resources?" That's a subtle distinction, but it's the difference between scarcity thinking and abundance thinking. Now, let's talk about what happens to your career once you hit this milestone. There's a concept in personal finance called walking away money, and traditionally people talk about it in the context of having years of expenses saved so you can quit a job you hate. But here's what actually happens much earlier, right around that $10,000 mark. You gain negotiating power. Not because you're going to quit your job dramatically, but because the psychological foundation changes. When you go into a performance review or a salary negotiation, you're not negotiating from a place of desperation. You know deep down that if things went sideways, you could cover your expenses for 2 or 3 months while you figured out your next move. That knowledge changes your body language, your tone, your willingness to advocate for yourself. Research from Columbia Business School found that negotiators who felt financially secure achieved 18% better outcomes on average compared to those operating from financial anxiety. 18%. On a $55,000 salary, that's nearly $10,000 more per year just from negotiating more effectively. And that's not because you're suddenly a better negotiator. It's because you're not operating from fear. There's a psychological feedback loop here that most people never experience because they never build that initial foundation. Once you negotiate successfully and get a raise, you can save more. Once you save more, you cross the next threshold faster. Once you have even more saved, you negotiate even more effectively next time. The gap between you and someone who never builds that initial cushion doesn't stay small. It compounds, just like your investments. But here's where most people mess this up, and I see it constantly. They finally hit $10,000 saved. They feel that psychological relief. And then they immediately blow it on something they've been wanting. A vacation, a new car, a bunch of stuff they've been denying themselves. And look, I'm not saying never enjoy your money. But if you drain that account back down below the threshold, you reset your psychology back to survival mode. All that progress, all that mental transformation, gone. Don't do this. Once you hit 10,000, your job is to defend that foundation like your life depends on it, because psychologically, your financial life does depend on it. Let it grow. Build on top of it. The breathing room you feel at 10,000 gets even better at 20, 30, 50,000. The compound interest that's just starting to show up at 10,000 becomes a powerful wealth-building engine at 50 and 100,000. This mindset shift extends to every major financial decision you make. Someone with $10,000 saved looks at a $30,000 car and thinks, that would wipe out my emergency fund and put me in debt. Not worth it. They buy the reliable $12,000 used car instead. Someone without that foundation thinks, I don't have savings anyway, what's the difference? And finances the $30,000 car. 5 years later, the person with the foundation has a paid-off car and $40,000 invested. The person without the foundation has a car worth $15,000 and still owes $8,000 on the loan. The gap isn't just the car. It's the entire trajectory. All right, so how do you actually do this? Let me paint you a practical picture of how this works, because I don't want this to just be motivational theory. I want you to walk away from this video with a system you can implement today. First, you need to know your number. For most people, 3 months of bare minimum expenses is the right target for that first threshold. Sit down, actually calculate what you spend on rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, minimum debt payments, everything you cannot cut if you lost your income tomorrow. Not what you spend when you're living your normal life. What you spend in survival mode. For a lot of people, that number is between $6,000 and $12,000. Let's call it $10,000 as a clean target. Second, you automate everything. The people who successfully build this foundation don't rely on willpower or remember to transfer money each month. They set up an automatic transfer from checking to a separate high-yield savings account the day after their paycheck hits. If you get paid on the first, your transfer happens on the second, before you have time to spend it. Start with whatever you can genuinely sustain. If it's $200 a month, great. If it's $500, even better. If it's $100, that's fine too. The amount matters less than the consistency. Third, you treat this money as untouchable for anything except actual emergencies. Not a sale, not a vacation, not because you really want something. Medical emergency? Yes. Car breaks down and you need it for work? Yes. You saw a great deal on a TV? Absolutely not. This is your foundation. You don't build a house, then dig up the foundation to decorate the living room. Fourth, once you hit that first $10,000, you split your strategy. You keep 3 to 6 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account where it's liquid and safe. Everything beyond that starts going into investments. A simple S&P 500 index fund through a Roth IRA or a taxable brokerage account if you've maxed the IRA. You're not trying to pick stocks or time the market. You're just consistently putting money into a diversified fund and letting compound interest do the work. Let's run the numbers on what this actually looks like. You save $500 a month for 19 months. You hit $10,000. You keep saving $500 a month, but now half goes to maintaining that emergency fund at a comfortable level, and half goes to investing. After 1 year of this approach, you've got $10,000 in cash, $3,000 in your investment account, and you've built a habit that's now completely automatic. You're not thinking about it. It's just happening. After 5 years, assuming you've been consistent and gotten average market returns, you're sitting on $10,000 in your emergency fund and roughly $38,000 in investments. You've built nearly $50,000 in net worth, starting from zero, while maintaining a completely normal life. You didn't become a monk. You didn't stop going out with friends. You didn't eat ramen for 5 years. You just built a system, automated it, and let it run. And you did this while maintaining a totally normal life. No sacrifice required, no burnout, just a system that works regardless of how you're feeling on any given Tuesday. Now here's another thing that makes this sustainable. Once you see that first year of results, something clicks. You stop seeing savings and investing as punishment and start seeing it as paying your future self. Every dollar you automate away is a dollar your future self doesn't have to stress about, doesn't have to earn, gets to enjoy as freedom and options. That reframe makes it emotionally easier to stay consistent. And this connects to something deeper about how wealth actually gets built. Wealthy people don't agonize over every financial decision. They build systems that make the right decisions automatic. Then they forget about it and focus on earning more or enjoying life. Once you've built this foundation, you're operating the same way a wealthy person operates, even if your net worth isn't there yet. You've adopted the psychology and the habits that create wealth, and that's what compounds over decades. Here's one last major obstacle I want to address because I know someone's thinking it right now. Matt, I can barely make ends meet as it is. I don't have an extra $500 a month. This advice doesn't apply to me. And look, if you're genuinely in that situation, I'm not going to pretend that saving is easy. It's not. But here's what I'd challenge you to consider. Most people who feel like they can't save anything are actually spending more than they realize on things that don't meaningfully improve their life. The average American spends over $3,000 a year on restaurant meals and takeout. Another $2,000 on subscription services, many of which they barely use. I'm not saying cut everything. I'm saying track your spending for 1 month, actually see where it's going. And I bet you find $100 to $200 a month that you can redirect without actually feeling deprived. Once you redirect that money and see your savings account grow, something psychological happens. You start finding more. You get creative. You pick up a side hustle, not because you have to, but because you want to accelerate the timeline. You negotiate a raise because you've proven to yourself that you're capable of building something. The initial action creates momentum that makes the next action easier. Look, hitting $10,000 in savings isn't going to make you rich overnight. It's not going to solve every financial problem you have. It's not going to magically erase debt or pay off your mortgage. But it will fundamentally change how you think about money, how you make decisions, and how you see yourself. So here's where we land. Building financial stability isn't about depriving yourself. It's not about getting lucky with a high income or an inheritance. It's about understanding that there are specific psychological thresholds that change everything. And the first major threshold is $10,000. You automate a consistent amount every month. You protect that foundation once you've built it. You let compound interest start working in your favor. And you adopt the mindset that your future self is a real person who deserves your help today. The people who do this end up financially secure, not because they made more money than everyone else or got lucky or had some special advantage, but because they understood that the first $10,000 is the hardest, most important money you'll ever save. Everything after that gets easier. The psychology shifts. The math starts working in your favor. The opportunities start appearing. Start building your foundation today because your future self is counting on the decision you make right now. Trust me, they'll thank you for it. If this video helped you see money differently, hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to Matt FinLab for more content on building wealth without sacrificing your life. And drop a comment below. Tell me where you are in your financial journey. Are you working toward that first $10,000? Already past it and building on top? Or just getting started and figuring out where to begin? I read every comment and I'd love to hear your story.